Hello tribe, thanks for tuning in for this video where I will explain the science of the self, the understanding, the true understanding of the self with a very common method that we have in our modern world, which is the scientific method. You see, we have built a culture, a global culture, and a society in general that is based on a view of reality that is presupposing that we are the product of matter, that matter is the fundamental thing in the universe. And you see, this has obviously come from a rigorous system of trying to understand reality, of decoding reality, as it were. And there is a key problem with this institutional science, because it's really what it is. You see, I want to make a distinction between what science really is and what institutional science that we have right now is. Because in general now we just use the term saying, well, science says this, science says that. Really, it's not science, it's institutional science that is permeating our knowledge of the universe, our knowledge of nature, and of course the knowledge of ourselves. So it only takes a bit of a moment to reflect on what the direction of humans and society has become since we started using this method as a, or not the method, but the science, use it for the presupposition that we have matter as the fundamental thing in the universe. So again, institutional science has done that. However, science really is a philosophy, a way to understand reality. And I'm going to use the very method that is used in even of course, our institutional science, because this is what created the way in which we understand and develop anything really. We have to go through this process. And again, it's a very useful and it's actually the best method that we have to understand anything. It truly is. But the key problem, like I said, is that we started this scientific method to build our institutional science on matter. You see, the question is, what really matters? Sorry. So what is the scientific method? You see, it's a very beautiful system because it does allow for the individual to investigate, to do an investigation on reality. But if we're going to investigate reality, isn't it more important to first understand who is investigating reality? Isn't that more important? Because how can we go out to nature, the universe, and create ideas of what reality is if we first don't understand who is trying to understand it? It seems too obvious, but we don't pay much attention to that. We don't create a definition or an understanding of the self that is involved. And so here we are, all of us trying to create all sort of theses on how reality works, and philosophers and scientists alike, they bump heads in arguments about what really is going on out there in the world. And because it's so variable, of course, we're going to have a constantly updated science. So let's just take the first step as true scientists and say, let me first investigate who is this scientist? Who is this person who has questions that wants to be answered? And you see, the beauty of it is that the only way to respond to all these questions is to go inside. So we're going to do that, and it's going to be a brief explanation, but I want to use the scientific method to tell you and show you that you can understand yourself, and it's only a matter of truly being a scientist and apply this science to your life, to your view, your worldview. And now you see, we have created, and it only takes a moment of reflection, again, to see the world that we have created based on this materialist science, in this assumption that we're all matter and what's going to happen is this, because we see the behavior of matter happening this way. You see, what kind of world have we created? I won't get into morality or anything here, but I think everybody can do a reflection and see where the world is. But that's because we haven't even answered who we are. We're still in that first question. And we still know, and now we think we know what a quasar is and what Hawking radiation is and so on, and the different biologies of the creatures in nature, and we don't understand who we are. So let's do that. Now, to briefly go through the scientific method. You see, we first started with an observation or question. That's the first thing. We as sentient beings, so to speak, we see things and we have questions. That's what self-awareness actually does. It starts asking questions. Who am I? Where am I? What is this? What am I doing here? You see, so we're going to start with the first one. Who am I? That's going to be our question or observation. We first observe that we exist, and then we have the question, I exist, so I have to know who I am. So the first question that we're going to make here is, who am I? This is our basis for understanding who we are, right? It's just simple. It's nothing esoteric about this, nothing too complicated, just who am I? Now, we're going to do a research, because that is the next step in the scientific method. We're going to do a research and we're going to find out, and in our investigation, we're going to explore and see what is going on. That's the next step. It's a natural step to see, okay, who am I? Let me explore what this is. Now, we have taken this into the external world, which is a way in which we can explore the self, but it seems to go outwards. One thing that we haven't done, at least in this modern society, and of course we have done in other cultures and traditions, I'm tempted to say that the East has developed this, and they have, but when you look at the East right now, you realize that they're in the same paradigm that we are. They're still in the buying into the materialistic science that is created by the Western world. So the world has been westernized, if you will. So in any case, this research that we're going to do is, how else can I look for myself if it's not within me? Who am I? Well, we're going to use self-inquiry. This is our tool. This is our simple tool, self-inquiry. Now, here is where we go into the depth of the teachings that I use, and I think is the most practical way for understanding everything. And this is understanding, what do I feel? Who do I think I am? In this, we first localize ourselves as the body. We say, well, I am this body because I feel, and I have sensations. And then in my perceptions, I realize that I have a voice and that there is something going on. And I call it thoughts and images that simply seem to pop out in my mind, just like reality seems to pop out in my eyes. So within me, there seems to be a process which we call the mind. But as we try to identify with the mind and the body, we see that we can have a variation of sensation. So we can't really say that the body is just one sensation or the other, or if it's enclosed here in the body, because we have thoughts and we have dreams and all of this. So what is going on? In our self-inquiry, what we're doing is we're finding that there seems to be a moving, an activity that is always happening, that is always changing. And if I try to identify with that, what I find is frustration, or what in Sanskrit is called dukkha. That is the first noble truth of the Buddha, right? But let's not get into specific philosophies. Let's just go with scientific method. We see that everything is changing, and my perception of self is always changing. So who I think I am seems to be in motion. So am I the motion, or is there something else behind that motion that remains still, that remains permanent? We find that in every single aspect of ourselves, every experience that we have had, there is always an element that we call consciousness. Now, consciousness is the basis for everything. So in our self-inquiry, we have developed the hypothesis that we are consciousness, right? This is the finding for us. We cannot get behind consciousness, as Max Planck actually said, the father of quantum physics, because consciousness precedes everything. There is nothing that we can talk about in reality that is not preceded by consciousness. In other words, you are always conscious of every single experience that you have. Even if, say, you faint and you lose consciousness, what you're losing is the ability of the mind to record what is happening. But when you suddenly wake up again and somebody tells you, well, you have been out for 3 hours, and you say, oh, I have been out for 3 hours, the mind records that. Otherwise, it would have to use the sun or maybe a clock or something if it remembers anything. But consciousness has always been there, and it always precedes the experience. So this is the rigorous system of research that we do in our process of investigation, of knowing who we are. And so we get to the point that we say we're consciousness. Now, the implications of this are infinite. And like I like to say, this realization actually is the answer to everything. Now, I don't have time in this video to answer everything, but I invite you to actually formulate any question that cannot be answered by this understanding that we are consciousness. Even all the most esoteric understandings of spirituality and ascension and densities of consciousness and so on, or even the most important ones of our physical reality, of what we're exploring, what we're seeing right now. But again, this becomes, I would say, just the true science, which is the self. And there's no surprise why the Hindus actually call this universe the self. So again, not to get into specific philosophies, now we're going to test and experiment with our hypothesis. Very simple, like I said. What is anything that you can experience that is not preceded by consciousness? In other words, is there anything that can be preceded by consciousness? Let's just create an example and say, well, there is an observer that is creating consciousness, or there is an element, let's call it dark energy, dark matter, that is preceding consciousness, that generates consciousness. And so, okay, let's say that. Let's say it is true. There is a membrane called consciousness, or an activity, or whatever you want to call it, and then there is something that is creating that. But who is aware of the creator of that? I mean, that creator needs to be aware. There needs to be a consciousness to it to create that consciousness. So, you see, you cannot get behind consciousness. It is impossible. Try as you may, you will always find frustration because you're using the mind to try to understand the infinite. And so, when we experiment, we see that all we find is awareness. We have awareness, and I know that's a synonym, but I have no other word to use. In our experiment, what we test is awareness always. And our conclusion is the same. That's what we are. We are pure consciousness. And see, from here, like I said, is where everything develops. If we take this understanding, if we approach our physical science, which is a beautiful one, don't get me wrong, I love it. I actually was devoted to the religion of science for 20-something years. And I think it's beautiful, but it's missing a key part, which is what is the fundamental reality behind everything. And we will find that it's consciousness. In fact, we knew this 100 years ago. Like I said, Max Planck, Einstein, and even Schrödinger, they used to talk about consciousness as the fundamental thing. They knew it, but because that was part of their philosophy of life and not something that could be tested and proven. They knew that it couldn't be proven. They were dealing with something abstract. Just like you can't prove that you love someone. I mean, if we agree that the actions that you perform are of a loving kind, and this is why we get into arguments about love. We haven't defined love, but love is the same. It's residing in the same realm or dimension or dimensionless space of awareness. So we can't define it. We can't prove it. There's no physical test that you can do, except those that you find online that maybe, I don't know, are there any tests? We find everything online. So I wanted to share this and show you how you can use the scientific method to see that you can do this within yourself. You can just find who you are by simply checking. And like I said, the most important thing that I would leave you with, the conclusion is that when we explore reality from this point of the true self, the real identity that we are, things change. And I can't really explain how they change, but it may seem like a moot point, but it isn't. Things change. And you see that your false identity that you call the ego is what has been just falsely assumed as a self. No presupposition is needed here, but only your own experience. And this is what I love about this method. So I hope this was of value to you. Hope it was clear and easy to understand. I'm using the own tool that we have for science, and that is the scientific method, just to show you that with anything you can always arrive to the same conclusion. So again, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.